Here we are at Benita Bar. About to drive into Auntie and Lexie and Robert's place. Okay, let's go. My next guest, she's a lady that's been in our life our whole lives. We love and adore her. When we were little, we used to get on the back of the car and go around the farm and hold on to the roof rack and have lots of rides. And she wore big earrings and she loves her gardens. She loves having the fire going in the kitchen. She's kept everything from our history, our wedding booklets, funeral booklets. She's produced two amazing and sometimes scallywaggle sons, Mark and Paul, that we love and adore. My next guest is Auntie Lexie. Yay! We love living in the farm, swimming in the river.
You a pet or a TV announcer?
Yes, so introduce yourself please, Auntie Lexie.
Oh, I'm Lexie Cawley. I was Lexie Flynn and I was Lexie Fritz. So, my husband Kerry Flynn died and I married Robert. So that's how come I'm involved with the Flynn and the Cawley families too.
So you've had extra families, Auntie Lexie.
I've had extra families.
The Cawley family and the Flynn family as well as the Fritz family. So.
And it's all been a very great relationship really.
And we adopted an extra uncle, so we've been, very fortunate from that perspective.
Yes.
As well. Very sad to have lost, obviously, Uncle Kerry. And on the other side, we've been very fortunate to have adopted Robert, and Robert's family, which is lovely. So,
and I've been so lucky to have two very good husbands.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even get one, only Lexie, do
no.
they? So.
But anyway,
so done something right.
I first met Kerry at Cloudland. I never went dancing too much, but a girl that I work with thought we should go dancing at Cloudland one night, and I met Kerry and Mark Doyle there. And anyway, they offered to take me home. I lived at Newmarket in Brisbane. Anyway, I accepted and they took me home. Anyway, Kerry, phones weren't sort of out too much in those days. Not everybody had a phone. But anyway, I suppose Kerry must have rung me up and we started going out. That might have been in about 1964. Anyway,
so you danced with him at Cloudland. Is that how you got to know him and Mark Doyle? Or
yes, I think we might have had a couple of dances, but we talked a lot, and they were a couple of nice young fellows. So I agreed to go home with them.
And you were living at Deakin, wasn't it, at that point? Is that where you were living?
I was living at Newmarket. With my mum and dad and brother.
And Uncle Kerry would have been living at the farm probably, would he?
Kerry was living at the farm because he was milking in those days. He left school, I think at about 14, because he wasn't well. And I think the doctor said that the healthiest life for him might be milking on the farm, so he was there milking at that stage. I suppose we spent a couple of years going back and forth to the farm, and we eventually married then in 1966.
So you said you met in 66 or 64. When did you say you met?
I think we met in 64.
64 and you married in 66.
Married in 66. Round about those dates anyway.
Do you recall when you first went to the farm, Auntie Lexie, like your first impression of... Because you were a city girl at that point, weren't you?
Oh, yes. My mum and dad went to Caboolture actually and bought a dairy farm, but that was a new experience for them too, because they'd never been on a farm before.
Were they? How old would they have been when they did that?
Oh, probably... Oh, they might have been in their 50s.
Okay, so that was a later in life decision to enjoy a dairy farm.
And I remember Granny Flynn saying, "You'll find it all so very different." And it was different too.
And were you living on the farm with them at Caboolture at the time that they...
No.
What or how you were already with Uncle Kerry by that time?
No. When Mum and Dad went to Caboolture on the farm, I was working in the bank in Brisbane, and I had to find some accommodation. I'd met Kerry, and Nana Ginther, lived in Milton, and she had a spare room. So my mum and dad went to Caboolture, and I shifted myself to Milton and lived with Nana Ginther and Fred Ginther.
So you'd met them at the farm when you'd gone back to the farm with Uncle Kerry. Is that how you'd met them, or you met them in Brisbane? Had Uncle Kerry taken you back to their place at Milton?
No, I met them at the farm when Kerry and I were sort of going out together. Not Fred. Fred was always sort of. Well, I only got to know Fred when I went to live at Milton with Nana.
Did you get to know Peter at all? Was he around at that time, Nana's husband?
No, Peter, Nana's husband Peter, he died.
So you never met him?
I never met him either. No.
Okay. And so just going back a few steps, because we really want to know about your time at Nana's place, because that's very interesting. What do you remember when you went to the farm? What was the state of the farm at that time? Like, you said you thought there were milking machines when you first went there, and do you remember there being lots of cows, or what was your impression?
Well, I was a city person, and it was very different going to the farm. But I'm sure there were milking machines there at that stage.
And Uncle Kerry was milking when you met him, so that was his sort of main job at that point?
But I think by that stage the doctors might have advised him to perhaps get another job away from the farm then. Anyway, he thought he'd join the railway, which he did join the railway, and he eventually became a signalman. He started off as a porter in Grantham, and then eventually got back to Brisbane and
was he
as a signalman.
So was he safe as a signalman because he'd had some health issues? Was there any question of him being fit to do some of the jobs in the, to do with the railway? Or?
I think there was questions asked at the time, but luckily he was able to join the railway anyway.
That's fantastic.
And at the beginning he would come from Grantham home every weekend, and he'd pick up me and Nana, and we would go out to the farm for the weekend. But when Kerry left the farm for the railway, that's when Dan Doyle came to take over the farm.
Okay, do you remember around the time that would have been? Do you remember the approximate year that Uncle Kerry left and Uncle Dan took over the farm?
Oh, geez.
Don't worry if you don't, because we can always look that up later on.
It might have been. If I said I met Kerry in 64?
Yeah,
64.
And married in 66, yeah.
Yeah, it might have been about 65 that Uncle Dan took over the farm.
So because Uncle Kerry was working in the railway when you married him at that time.
He was.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
He was already a porter at Grantham.
Yeah.
But until we got married, he'd travel back and forth every weekend from Grantham to Brisbane, pick up Nana and I, and then we'd go to the farm.
And what were your trips like at the farm? Like, can you give us an idea when you went to the farm for the weekend? What did you do for the weekend when you were there?
Well, it was pretty interesting really, because Mari was, I think she was secretary of the Jimboomba Hall Committee.
Okay.
And there were the dances.
Oh, yeah.
So many times, well, it might have only been once a month, I can't remember how many times a month, but on a Saturday we'd go up to Flynn's store in Jimboomba and pick up all the ingredients for the dances, because we would cut all the sandwiches, cut all the cake up.
Okay. So the Flynn store, was that related to anyone in the family, or just a separate Flynn?
Just happened to be the Flynn store.
Okay.
Yes, and we'd bring all the bread and the butter and the fillings, and the cakes would be in big slabs, and you'd cut them all up into smaller pieces, and cut all the crusts off the sandwiches, and the dogs loved it because they had a great feed of crusts.
Auntie Mari organised that, did she?
secretary of the hall committee,
Oh, great.
Timboomba Hall Committee.
Because I often remember Mama used to tell a story about the dances actually that Uncle Kerry, when he was 6, it would have been when he was older, was obviously flipping tablets all the time under his tongue, so that he could, was when he had any pain, that sort of thing, so that he could keep dancing. So she said she remembers him getting her up and going for a dance at the Timboomba Hall.
That was just before he died.
Yeah, that's
actually.
right. Yeah,
that happened.
yes, but
Yes,
But going back to that, so your initial going out to the farm on weekends, you often had the dances and things like that. And
yeah, the dances were good.
did you go to church with them back then?
Oh
or-
yes, we'd go to church, and it'd usually be down at Park Ridge. There was a church at Park Ridge.
Oh, that's where we went as kids as well, wasn't it? The Park Ridge one, yeah. So that was still
great.
that was where you went at that time too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was great days because after church, all you kids would sort of run around the
We
place.
had a great time. It's the best days ever. Played Tiggy and halfway through at the offertory, run around shaking hands with everyone. It was absolutely fantastic. But
Yeah.
and so do you remember much about the cows and the milking and anything like that?
I don't know that I ever did much milking
Yeah.
at all
Yeah.
because Mari and I might be washing actually.
Yeah.
They'd got a new Ringer washing machine at that stage, and we'd probably be washing and trying to save as much water as we could because there was only the tanks there, and oh dear, some of the yard clothes were pretty dirty.
I can imagine they were Flynn kids. So
yeah.
So then, as you say, then things went on. You got married in 1966, and you said so you'd moved in with Nana before you married Uncle Kerry.
Oh yes, I'd moved in with her before that when Mum and Dad went to Caboolture to the farm.
So how was
moved
that? What
in
was
with
it? Tell
her.
us all about that experience living with Nana and Fred. You said Fred lived there too.
Yeah,
then?
Fred Gimpter, who was Nana's brother-in-law.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that Fred was a bit strange, but I really liked Fred when she got to know him.
What was he like? Can you give us a picture for us that didn't know him at all? Can you give us a bit of a picture of his personality?
Well, he was a man that never married,
Yes.
and he'd been to the wars,
Yeah.
and I think he'd travelled around Asia quite a lot too,
Yeah, I have heard that.
from some of the photos that we might have seen. He was a great carpenter because he built the
dairy, didn't he?
built the dairy.
Yeah,
at
I have
Timboomba.
heard that, which is wonderful because Chris now has moved that to part of it anyway to his place, so we've still got part of it, which is wonderful.
And that's only happened in recent months.
Yeah, that's right.
I wonder when that dairy was built.
Yeah, well,
Are there
we will
any
have to look
records of
that.
that?
I don't think we've got the exact date of it, but I'm sure we'll find it between everyone. I'm sure we'll find that out actually. So, but I did hear that he was a carpenter and built that, which is fantastic. And so was he good to you? Do you remember how he treated you, Fred, when you were
Oh
there?
yes, he was a nice old chap. When Paul was born, well, Kerry and I was already at Nana's. We got married, and the house was that way where there was a big bedroom here, and there was a big veranda across there, and sort of a hallway, a big room, a big bedroom, and the hallway through here, and a veranda across the front, all done in. And we had a big bedroom here, and then we made this part here into a kitchen.
Okay.
And we had a stove over here, and a stove and a fridge, and a sink over here, and our table in here. And Fred, he had his bed and so forth on the other end of the hallway, but there was partitions there,
Okay.
you know. And it was pretty good.
Did Fred have dinner with you at night time or not?
Yes, we did have dinner. Fred always walked into George Street.
Okay, so because this was
Every
the house
day.
here at Bellevue Terrace, was it?
13 Bellevue Street.
13 Bellevue Street in Milton, isn't it?
In Milton.
Yeah.
Gone now.
Yeah,
The
I
brewery.
actually remember because, of course, we went to it. Because I remember Fred, I met him as a young, but we were very young, of course. And I remember how steep the house was. You had to go up the stairs, didn't you,
very
on the
steep.
street? And
Before I married Kerry, I was working in the ANZ Bank in Brisbane, and I'd come home during the winter, and the brewery was there. And you'd have to walk down the side of the brewery, and then up that steep Bellevue Street, and then up that side of the house, and every bit of it was so dark.
Yeah.
It was so
Yeah,
frightening.
Wow. Oh, really?
Mm.
But did you feel safe coming home?
Oh, well, you did it.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
Yeah. And how did Nana and Fred get on?
Oh, they got on very well.
Did they?
Nana always spoke highly of Fred
Oh, that's
because,
good.
I mean, he was a great help to her.
Yeah.
He did all the shopping.
Oh, did he?
He'd walk into George Street every day except
Oh, really?
Sunday, and he would bring home any food that she wanted.
Oh, really?
And then
So they
walk
actually
home
worked very
again.
well together.
They did.
Was Fred Peter's older brother or younger brother? Do you know that? Even though I can find those details.
Yes, I don't know whether he
Yeah.
was older or not.
Yeah.
But,
So really, they worked quite well together, and that he did the shopping, and did she do all the cooking?
Yeah, she did
And
all
that
the
sort of thing,
cooking,
so-
and he always bought these sausages from, I don't know whether it was Borthwick's in George Street. And, they were lovely sausages.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but none of you. Well, when I was working in the bank and I came home, I was lucky that she'd have my tea ready for me too.
And she was happy to. Was she good to you, Nana, or how did she?
She was, yes,
Yeah.
very good. And of course, I think Michael was Nana's favourite.
Yes, I've
And
heard
then,
that.
and then perhaps Kerry might have come next. So
Well,
she
I think
loved
Dad
Kerry
lived with
too.
her, of course, and probably the Uncle Kerry lived with her too. Didn't he?
Yes,
'Cause
probably.
Uncle Peter did tell me in his interview that he went to live there too, like Dad, but he didn't last in Milton. That
Ah.
he didn't like it. He liked being back on the farm, so he said he went for about 3 weeks to Milton school. I think I'd have to check back those details, but then he went straight back to the farm. So,
Oh, right.
where of course Dad went there at a very young age. We've got to confirm the exact time, but we think it was when he was probably 6 or 7 or so. And sounds like Nana mostly read Dad a lot of those years because he was
Yes,
there.
from
So
what we
it was probably
heard.
like her child, really. He became a bit
Yes.
like a child for her. So
Mm.
so Nana was very good to you, and obviously she had a very good relationship with Uncle Kerry by the sounds of it.
Yes, she
Nana?
did. To her family, now I'm talking about my generation, the Flynns of my generation, like
Yes.
Michael and Kerry and Peter
Yeah.
and Murray. I think she was very generous.
Yes, I do remember that actually. Mum would say she'd give them $50 sometimes when they didn't have much money, and they would depend. They really that $50
Yes.
was a really big thing for them, and
Ah.
so I gather she was very generous with the family.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, as the story goes on, she owned a set of flats up in Finchley Street, which was sort of up the hill from 13 Bellevue Street.
Oh, right.
And she sold those flats, and at that time she gave each of the family a little bit of money out of those. You look back at that amount of money now and it sounds just so little,
Yeah.
but probably at that
It
time
would have been a lot of money.
it was probably a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And so you and Uncle Kerry were living with her, and then what happened next?
Well,
You moved to Paul was born there.
Paul was
he?
born, and I was only thinking about this today. Actually, Paul was born, and this hallway that I talk about that used to come down here, it sort of veered off onto a veranda with wooden boards on the veranda. Anyway, Paul got to the stage of crawling, and I don't know that the veranda had ever seen a drop of water in its life, actually, and I thought I'd wash the veranda over, give it a bit of a scrub because Paul was crawling around everywhere, and being the first child, I'm sure you were more finicky. Anyway, Nana and Fred nearly had a fit when I went to wash the veranda over.
Why is that?
Oh, they thought it had hurt the boards,
did
the
they?
water on the boards.
Oh, right. Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. Isn't that interesting? And were they excited when you had a baby? Or, Nana and Fred? Do you remember
I suppose so.
whether they were happy about that? And,
Yes, well, Fred was very distant to start with, but as time went on, even Fred got to love Paul.
Did he?
He'd sort of hold him on his lap or put him up on the table and talk to him and so forth.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And how old would Paul have been when you moved out then? So you moved out to
Cooper's Plains.
Cooper's Plains. When did you do that, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. Would I say 7 months old? Or
Paul would have been almost 1 possibly when you decided to move out.
yeah.
And you found a house, which is the same house today that Mark still lives in. Yeah.
Yes.
That I remember going to, of course, as children. And
Yes.
I do have one, you're talking about carrying the railway. Of course, he always cracked jokes on us all, and he came home one night dressed in his railway outfit with a gorilla hat on and scared us all, and we opened the door, I think, one time at your place at Cooper's Plains. I do remember him playing jokes on us like that, but
Probably it's only recently that Mark still does that.
I think Mark's exactly the same.
Yes, he is.
does that all the time. So Cooper's Plain, so you moved there.
We moved there, but the situation still went on where every weekend, Kerry was in Brisbane in the railway by that stage, but he would have his weekends off, and every weekend we'd have to pack up. He'd go and pick up Nana, and Kerry and I and Paul and Nana would go to the farm for the weekend.
So you did that nearly every weekend?
Every weekend until, it went on, for a couple of years, and I eventually got a bit sick of it.
Of course. Did Kerry milk the cows there or something, or is that what he did? Or?
Oh yeah, well he'd help Dan milking.
Okay, so that's why he'd go back, or to see Granny, or did Nana want him? Do you remember why he went back every single weekend?
Well, I think it was a combination of a few things. Probably
Nana wanted to go back, and there was no other way of her getting...
Yeah, and probably Granny wanted to see... They all wanted to see each other, probably.
Yeah.
And Kerry was in a Jimboomba cricket team too.
Right.
So he, when cricket season was on, he'd always play cricket.
Was he good at sport, Uncle Kerry? Like most of the Flynns seem to be very good at sport.
Yeah,
so
I think he was pretty good at sport.
Yeah.
I think there's a picture up in the hotel at Jimboomba of his cricket team that had won, I don't know, some finals or something, but anyway, it's up on the wall at Jimboomba in the hotel.
So you soon said to Uncle Kerry, okay, I don't want to go every single weekend, which is probably fair enough. So you stopped going every weekend.
Yes, every weekend, but we still went fairly. And then there were the times that we went to see my mum and dad too, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And around that time, did Nana, I guess Fred died at some point here, didn't he? And Nana moved out eventually.
Yes.
That was a bit later though, wasn't it? Because Fred was...
I don't
died when I was...
Murray sort of looked after everything for Fred.
Yeah.
He'd paid his funeral years and years and years before at Metropolitan Funerals, and then when Murray went to sort of bury him, they were actually refusing to pay for his funeral, and yet he'd paid for it probably decades before.
So that was the Metropolitan Funerals refused to pay?
Refused to pay, but anyway, Murray stuck her guns, and she did get a funeral for him, but I don't even know where Fred's buried.
Uncle Peter said that as well, that he doesn't know and he would really like to know where he's buried.
Yes.
And he wondered whether they didn't do a funeral for him, but you think that they...
Well, I didn't go to the funeral.
But do you remember if there was a funeral, or...?
I can't really remember, and we haven't got Mari to ask anymore, have we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's obviously, yeah, so I guess, it's interesting that you said that he paid that off, and...
oh yes, probably when he came home from the war. But every Sunday with Fred, it would be his wash day and his bath day.
Didn't he bath every other day? Well, or he only bathed occasionally?
I think he only bathed on a Sunday.
Did he? Yeah. Amazing. It was probably quite common back then, wasn't it, with water being scarce? Maybe.
Yes, although we lived in the town at Bellevue Street.
Oh, so you could have had the town water. That's
but anyway, he washed, and he always wore a flannel singlet.
Oh, did he?
A lot of men back in those days wore a flannel
singlet.
Did you
wear one too, Robin?
No, I didn't, but a lot of the older generation did.
They did.
That's interesting, isn't it?
And then he'd hop in the bath, and I always wondered when I went there why the bath was pink. It was a white bath, and I might have told you this before, but he put Condy's crystals in the bath.
Did he put what was that, to sterilise anything for him? Maybe you thought it might have got rid of any germs or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was something that was brought in, that they were brought up through the ages with.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I even did look up Condy's crystals once in some book, and I've forgotten what it was for now, but it was purple. Once you put it in.
A lot of people, I remember probably being born into that, that we don't hear about it now much, of course, but a lot of people use that. And so, okay, so you had your years there, and then you moved to Salisbury, and I guess, to Cooper's Plain, sorry, and I guess the next interesting person we want to know about is Aggie. So when did Aggie come along how did that situation happen, that Aggie started living with you?
Yeah, well, I can't remember the year Aggie came, but...
do you remember how it even happened that she lived with you? It happened
probably... I think she may have been moving out of her own home, and she wanted somewhere to go, and of course Joe and Faye had their home and family, and I'm sure
Yes.
they sort of wanted to be on their own. And
Yeah.
so Aggie was looking for somewhere to go,
Mm.
and I was sort of happy for her to come.
Mm.
It was very good because I was working in the bank and Gary was in the railway.
Oh,
And
so she helped you out a bit, did she?
he was working shift work,
Mm.
and so she came, and she had her own room, and well,
So Aggie
She-
is grandfather Flynn's older half-sister.
Half-sister.
Yes, so, yeah.
but she lived with us for several years actually, and
How old would she have been around that time, do you remember? It's probably hard to remember those things,
probably
isn't it?
late 70s,
Yeah,
early 80s or so.
And did she know both of you well when she came to move? Because did she go to the farm a lot at the same time you were going
Well,
to the farm?
probably we
Got to
did
know
it
her.
through the farm. Of course,
Yeah.
Kerry knew
Would have
her.
known her very well, yes.
And she actually had a very big liking for Kerry too.
Okay.
I think probably because Kerry had been sick
Yeah,
in those
Yeah.
early days.
yes.
Yeah, she sort of really loved Kerry too.
So she was very happy to come and live with you,
Yes.
because she loved Kerry and she got to know you at that point, and so
Well, the
really
kids-
she helped you at that point a little bit too. So it's a bit of a mutually beneficial situation then, because you were both at work and she could help a little bit with the children.
Yes. I mean, Paul was only about 7 months old when we went there, I think. And of course, Mark was born after that. But she didn't come along, like, as I said, can't remember the year, but she didn't come along till Paul and Mark were in kindy.
Okay,
She
so
only
yeah, so
started
maybe
with
3 or
us
4 or
then.
5 or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And Joe, her son Joe, Joe Gregg, would come and pick her up every Saturday morning and take her to Joe and Faye's place for the weekend, and then Joe would bring her back on a Sunday night.
And she enjoyed that? You know,
She
always looked
looked forward to that.
Yeah, yeah, that's
because
fantastic.
Joe was just everything
Mm.
to Aggie.
Yeah, that's
Everything.
Because Joe's Aggie's oldest son, isn't he? Joe's the
Well,
oldest.
the only son, isn't
Yeah.
he?
Yeah, that's right. I'm thinking of Joe's children now. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
the only son.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. And what do you?
and-
Sorry.
Anyway, she lived with us for several years until she felt she was getting on in age then, and she felt that she didn't want to do. Oh, she'd probably the kids would come home of an afternoon, and Faye, Joe's wife Faye, would always iron the children's shirts, the school shirts. So Aggie would always have to iron the children's Paul and Mark's school shirts, and she was very good. I mean, I did all the washing and heavier things like that, but she'd bring it in and fold, and she was a great help to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Working.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it was great, and the children had a good relationship with her, Mark
Yes,
and
they
Paul.
did.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great because she would have been like another auntie grandmother type figure, wouldn't she?